What do you think happened in the election? Do you think it was on the up and up? Are all these claims about fraud and misbehavior and whatnot obviously wrong, and people should be driven out of public life if they entertain them?
Certainly nobody should be driven out of public life for entertaining ideas. I think that that is a dangerous place to go. So we'll start there. But what do I think happened in the election?
Yeah, that's
well,
what I'm
first
asking.
of all, I have to say I don't know. And I'm annoyed with people who believe they know, because I think there's a lot of ambiguity around it. I think there are suggestive pieces of circumstantial, at least, evidence that may not indicate any bad activity or any, I don't know the word I'm looking for, irregularity. No, there were irregularities. Okay, so there were unambiguously irregularities, and those irregularities match with irregularities that we see when in other countries that indicate blatant misfeasance. So misfeasance was the word I was looking for. I don't know if that they indicate misfeasance here or not. It's the same pattern that you see where misfeasance has occurred in other places, where the votes count stopping, for example, for several hours, and then you come back online and the numbers have changed dramatically. I don't know if this is on the up and up, as has been explained. I don't know if it's not on the up and up, as you would see if it happened in Turkey. Everybody would be like, wait a minute, right? Erdogan, what are you up to? Everybody would be suspicious of this, but maybe it's on the up and up in this case. Maybe it was just mail-in ballots. Maybe it was just this. Maybe it was just that. As for whether or not there was manipulation around the election, not only do I think that that's absolutely the case, which is different than changing vote totals, by the way, outright election fraud. Manipulation's different. Not only do I think there was, Time Magazine just published their confession 2 days ago. So
what is it? What is manipulation? Define that. What is manipulation?
So in this case, the manipulations included a concerted campaign by social media to suppress certain ideas and certain views. For example, the Hunter Biden laptop story, which seems to grow and lose relevance depending on whatever else is going on in the world at any given time, but was certainly just completely suppressed in advance of the election. You saw these manipulations on Twitter, for example, that you could no longer naturally retweet. You had to push the retweet button twice. They didn't explain that to people, so people thought they couldn't just retweet certain information. Turns out that on progressive blogs there were explanations of what was going on. Maybe this was coordinated and maybe it wasn't. We now see the thing in the Time Magazine saying that there was a, literally they call it a cabal. they call themselves a cabal of people who had organized to make sure that the information space, that the legal requirements around whether you can do mail-in ballots, where you can do them, what the dates would be, etc. All of those things. There was a cabal. It was started. That's their word for themselves. So I'm not applying it to them. In late 2019, to try to organize that the election would be, they said, safeguard democracy away from Donald Trump's manipulations. And then they just talk about all the manipulations that they did. There were certainly examples that they talk about, even in the article, where they had to keep Republicans away from the vote count tables because they were harassing. The Republican vote watchers were allegedly harassing Democrats and not wearing masks and so on. So there were definitely irregularities. There was definitely a manipulation of the media space. Whether that constitutes election fraud or malfeasance, I don't know. Whether it constitutes some form of manipulation to where you have massive social media companies that control much of the flow of relevant information, working in concert with traditional media to skew perceptions in a particular way so that, people would vote in particular ways, is another thing. Then when you look again at changing the election laws on short notice, often as we saw in Pennsylvania, in illegal ways. So there are lots of things here to where there's a feeling of manipulation around this election.
Let me stop you for a minute. I want to go on with this, but first of all, I have to say, a lot of people are going to say it's irresponsible of me to even allow someone on my podcast to say the things that you've just said, because
I know.
The saying of them is somehow seditious or profoundly disruptive of rationality or whatever.
And you'll notice that I started with, I don't know.
Exactly.
As my
That's where I wanted to go. That's where I wanted to go. Why does it annoy? Where I wanted to go was, what? You can't even ask a question? You can't even ask what happened? It's seditious to ask what happened? Really? Do you think you know what happened? So how would we know what happened? Are we going to be in such a state that we compel ourselves to incant a mantra about what happened because it's politically acceptable to do so without examining what might have happened? So I think you have to be able to ask the question. On the other hand, the courts, the political process, where's the evidence? I can remember that press conference that Giuliani and company had with the hair dye running down the side of his face. They alleged a nationwide coordinated Democrat conspiracy to steal the election.
Right.
Where's the evidence for that? And if the evidence for that is not sufficient to lead a court to think that perhaps something that warrants intervention has happened, don't we have to, whatever the doubts might be, put it behind us and accept the outcome of the process? So if the malfeasance or whatever doesn't rise to the level of credibly suggesting that the outcome of the election would have been different, doesn't the sort of logic of the legitimacy and stability of our democratic processes require both the former President Trump when he was in office, but then the rest of us too, to get behind it, get behind the reading of the election as having produced the legitimate outcome of Joseph Biden being the winner?
Well, I think have to obviously agree with the caveat that we have to be able to ask the question. We have to follow the evidence, but we also have to be able to ask the question to look for evidence that may not have come to light so far. Not to say that we should have, some ridiculous number or quantity of resources dumped into it, like we might do if somebody believed for 4 years that Russia stole an election previously. Maybe, but we should be able to ask the question. So I think that the answer is that if the evidence isn't there, and I said this recently in a very colorful way on a different podcast because I didn't know I was being recorded yet. I knew the recording light was on, but I didn't think we'd started because the other guy wasn't there. And so I won't repeat the F word on your show. But I said that if the evidence isn't there, you need to shut the F up. And so we have to go with what the totality and the balance of evidence says.
Okay.
But we should also be able to remain suspicious. We should also be able to request investigations. We should also be able to ask the question. And it is the right of every human being, especially in a free country, to hold doubt of anything they wish to hold doubt about. A party line is not a strong basis for any free country. In fact, it's antithetical to one. And so, yes, I agree with you. We should follow the guidance of the best evidence that we have while being able to ask the question and being open to the possibility that the mantra is just a mantra.
A lot of people think that what happened in Dallas in November of 1963, the killing of Kennedy, was not accurately rendered the assessment by the Warren Commission. A lot of people think that. Serious people, serious historians have written books in which they raise questions of this sort.
Right.
Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. No, he didn't. And then there are various accounts of who might have been involved in that. I don't recall anybody being run out of town on a rail because they doubted whether or not the Warren Commission got it entirely right, or because they were prepared to entertain one or another speculation for which there might be some circumstantial evidence. That's an entire industry, and it's gone on for a half century. So this election is not going to go into American historical memory with one narrative about it. There are going to be conflicting narratives. And there's something, I must say this, and I've already come out and said Trump should have stepped aside after he exhausted his remedies in the courts. And the fact that he didn't is to his discredit. I've said all of that. But the idea that you're going to discredit or defrock or render unemployable a person who entertains in their mind the possibility that something went on that wasn't appropriate here, that really feels quite tyrannical to me. It feels like thought control to me, and I worry about it.
I worry about it on the direct level as you do, and I worry about it on a deeper level in what it will provoke. And I'm not calling for anything. I hope nothing happens. But the truth is that when people feel like they've been stripped of any reasonable means, what they're left with is unreasonable means. If you take away everybody's legal means to ask questions, the questions are going to come somehow. What you're going to have is you have a very large population in the United States right now, many tens of millions probably, who are extremely suspicious of this election. And what I've said from the very beginning, I said this, I think from like the 6th or the 7th of November, I've said Trump and his team are not acting like people who have evidence, and the Democrats and their team are not acting like people who are innocent.
What do you mean by that?
If you're innocent, you're open to an audit. If you're innocent, you're open to having the question. The question being asked will vindicate you rather than declaring absolutely unaskable, getting banned from social media for asking the question, getting shut down, being called out by a congresswoman as needing to be put on a list to be made unemployable and unpersoned.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not the kind of thing that somebody who's innocent does. Now, I do understand that we live in a fractured information space, a fractured, I don't even know. I wrote an essay a long time ago saying that the Overton window hasn't moved, it's been broken. There are 2 of them, and there are more than 2 of them, I think, now. It's been shattered. And so within each one of these little Overton windows of acceptable opinion, they don't even necessarily overlap that much. I can understand the idea that you would say, okay, we're going to, some of these are QAnon is abjectly crazy, and we're going to just completely discredit that one, and we're not going to entertain it. But it's another thing entirely when you start not just suppressing, which is a hard question about dialogue in social media and in our social media era, but actively punishing, canceling people, making them unpersoned and unemployable as a willful act, attempting to create lists of people who participated in this. Many people who just showed up to the Capitol on the 6th to engage in what they thought was free assembly and free speech, utterly peaceful, utterly calm, never had anything to do with what happened that was inappropriate at the Capitol, except having to have been within a few hundred yards of it when it happened, being put on no-fly lists and being harassed by border agents and things like this. This is absolutely an overreach that should be an outrage to everybody who cares about civil liberties.
It's easy, and
I think we should be able to agree on that.
I do agree with it, and it's easy to see the overreach if you just switch the script a little bit and imagine facial recognition software used to identify people who attended rallies for Black Lives at which violence broke out or something inappropriate took place. And then you try to affect their employment prospects or otherwise damage them publicly because they were present at such a thing. It would be it wouldn't take long before the massive machine of progressive propaganda was mobilized on behalf of the free speech and right of assembly rights of people to express their political opinions, and you can't persecute them for having done so.
And quite rightly, there's an infinite gulf of difference between showing up to protest freely in, say, for whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's Stop the Steal or whatever the thing was called, and being the person who lobbed the Molotov cocktail. The gulf between those things is incommensurable.
But what kind of person would come to the defense of the insurrectionists now? And I mean that only slightly tongue in cheek when I say it. I mean, Of all the things that we could be talking about right now, why would we be defending the insurrectionists? Are you say you're worried about?
Why did the ACLU and the Supreme Court defend the Klan and their right to free speech?
Okay, good answer.
I mean, I don't know anybody. I mean, I'm going to get accused of being a Klan supporter, which I'm not. But why?
No, that would be a willful distortion. You just made an analogy. You're saying
exactly.
the reason to speak for the insurrection, quote unquote, the insurrectionists is that many, maybe even most of them, were not quote unquote insurrectionists at all, and that people should be able to assemble and express their views about American politics without being demonized for having done so.
Yeah,
just
I think
like
that
the
people
ACLU
who were
would say that
involved,
on behalf of the Klan. It doesn't mean you endorse their views, but you did vote for Trump. You told me you do endorse their views.
But let me make a point real quick, which is that I think that every single person who was involved in something genuinely insurrectionist, the people with zip ties running around in the Capitol,
yeah,
unambiguous that this is a problem. They should be investigated and they should be held to account by the law. And when they've been held to account by the law, they've been held to account by the law, just like every other person in our entire political system. Whatever law applies is what law applies. If that ends up disenfranchising them, because that often happens for felons, that's what happens. Every single person who is actually involved should be, and I know this is idealistic, it's not realistic, but every person involved should be held in a perfect world exactly to the level of account that they deserve, given under the law. When I say deserve, I don't mean that in some like metaphysical moral sense.
Yeah.
So everybody carrying around those zip ties should probably be in some trouble. People who just happened to be there or thought, oh, wow, a bunch of people are going in, I'm going to wander in too. Like that old lady with the flag and her mask pulled down, everybody's seen the picture of. Yeah. Like, what did she do? Like the guy carrying the podium. Well, you can't steal a podium, dude. But the guy just walking around smoking weed in the middle of the rotunda, like what did you do, really? As a friend of mine said, we call it insurrection. People say it's a coup. A friend of mine said recently, and I just love it, calling it an insurrection or a coup. Now, there were certainly people who had that intent, but they were relatively small in number. Calling it that, given that they had no plan, obviously, once they got in, there were people just taking selfies and making videos for the gram and every other thing. He said it's 7 orders of magnitude too stupid to have been a coup attempt. 7 orders of magnitude too stupid is what actually happened at the Capitol. Now, that's a matter of debate. But my hard and fast opinion is that every single person involved in the Capitol, as well as, to be honest, the various racial justice as they were, protests and mostly peaceful protests and riots, and 93% peaceful, we were told, they should all be held to account under the full expression of the law based on what they actually did. And I understand that's idealistic. I understand it's impossible to do in practice, but the best job possible should be done. So I'm not saying anybody should be let off the hook. And I'm not even saying, oh, well, a bunch of people, Antifa got away with it because the DAs dropped it, so they should drop. No, I don't even care about that. The repressive tolerance is happening, but everybody who gets arrested and gets investigated properly should be held to account for the actual crime they committed, if any. And I don't think that wandering into the Capitol after people started going in constitutes any significant crime. So those people should probably be left mostly alone.
You're worried about backlash, are you? That the Democrats are going to overplay their hand here?
I think they already are. Yeah. I don't know what the backlash will look like. They're freaking people out. I'll tell you that. They're freaking people out. I don't know how many executive orders we're up to now from Mr. Biden, close to 50, but they're freaking people out. That's for sure. There's a lot of people upset. He canceled the pipeline, 11,000 jobs, I think is the number I heard, just gone. Those people mostly supported him, not happy. There's a lot of people really worried about some of these orders that he's put in, whether it's about this climate stuff, whether it's about the equity stuff, canceling the critical race theory executive order. People are worried about where this is going. What's the one about the gender ideology one where, now federal funding in schools, you have to let, I guess, trans women play on girls' teams. People are worried about this stuff.
Well, I will note, this is not what the election was about. These issues were not in the main. I mean, he may have said, I'm going to cancel Keystone XL. I think he did say so. and that would be the environmentalist posture. And we know that he would have been a, friendly to environmentalist presidency. Also, with respect to immigration and the border, it was pretty clear. But a lot of these things were not litigated during the actual electoral process. It was about COVID and it was about Trump.
Yeah.
But now that the outcome is in, a relatively close election, all things considered, the outcome is in, massive ideological shifts are being implemented, or at least attempted. And the extent to which they have Democratic endorsement is unclear, but there'll be a midterm election in 2022, the Congress and so forth. We'll see whether it holds. Clearly, however, the activists on the left have got a shot at doing something, and they've got an open road ahead of them with Joe Biden in the White House.
Now, let's not dodge the question though. So you have to hold me. You asked me if I voted for Trump, and I have not yet addressed. So you got to hold me to the fire. You got to hold me to the fire here, Glenn.
How so?
I did vote for Trump.
Why'd you vote for Trump?
Okay, so I went into this pretty heavily in detail before the election. There are a number of reasons, one of which is actually kind of profoundly left-wing in orientation of all things. The first thing that I noticed, and we already talked a little bit with the Hunter Biden laptop, is that you may have noticed that the media held Trump to account for an awful lot, even things he didn't do. Yeah,
stuff
right.
Stuff he didn't do.
Yeah, they kind of mentioned everything that he did being wrong a lot. And so the function, and I don't think we had a healthy media under this circuit. In fact, I think they were crazy. But the function of the media should be, in a democracy, at least in significant part, it should, of course, be to report the facts, but it should also be to hold power to account. And I see, after especially the Hunter Biden laptop scenario, I saw absolutely no reason to believe that was going to happen. That we're going to see softball media around Biden, and just what Trump was getting was just being held to account isn't even the right word.
Okay, the media hated Trump. That's the reason to vote for him?
No. Well, yes, partly, but not just the media hated Trump. The media is also defending Biden. You remember when all these people were like, oh, Fox News is just state media for Trump, just state media, and everybody understands that state media is bad? The New York Times, CNN, what are they doing with Biden? What are they doing? That, the state media question is a serious one. When you have a highly partisan media environment and you have the most authoritative sources in the country taking a very biased stance, you have to be very wary of empowering the side that they're biased toward. Okay. It's a little more nuanced than the media didn't like Trump, therefore. It's a little, but that's also a thing. That's my left-wing reason, by the way, is anybody who's being treated that unfairly is probably the underdog. And I am at heart still a leftist in that regard. Like, I have to take the side of the underdog. And I spent 3.5 years thinking that Trump was awful. He's probably a dictator. I bought into the whole line. And then all of a sudden I started noticing, like, wow, a lot of these stories turned out not to be very true. Somebody told me one day, just go get on your Google and type in Trump was right and see what comes up. And it's shocking. And then I started watching, I have to give credit, the walkaway movement, the walk away from Democrats, Brandon Straka. He's been struck from everything now. I watched some of their videos. The very famous video in particular stands out in my memory where Trump allegedly mocked the disabled reporter. This, of course, was a huge thing.
He didn't do that? He didn't do that?
Well, okay,
because they show him.
He did that.
Okay.
He did that. But he also did that for about 30 other people before that. He would be like, Nancy Pelosi came out and I said this to her and she was like, And it's the same maneuver. In other words,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, nobody knows that. And then, the very fine people thing. Like,
that one.
That one's egregious.
Biden says, it's when I decided to run for president when I saw him supporting white supremacists. And not a single reporter said to Biden, well, he didn't support white supremacists, which is actually the case. Now, maybe in someone's imagination, he's friendly to white supremacists because he hasn't denounced them vigorously enough. But in those remarks that he made after Charlottesville, it's simply false to say.
It's simply false.
And no one, not a single person said to Joseph Biden, whose reason for running for president he self-declared to have been that Trump did something that he didn't actually do. That's terrifying.
It's terrifying. And so this is part of it. Part of it, more of it, most of it, in fact, though, is that I actually know how our federal government works these days a little bit, which is to say that I understand the relevance of the administrative state, and more importantly, how it's very unaccountable to the voter, right? And so I realized that Biden is already signaling. He had his whole racial equity program. He had his whole, all of these different very progressive things he was talking about, the Gender Act he was talking about, all well before. This is all within my wheelhouse of woke studies. And I'm watching this and I'm reading it and I'm thinking, wow, this guy is going to be not always, but frequently a pen for these activists. And I have a feeling he's going to appoint to administrative positions high up in the Department of Education. Turns out that the top is where he stuck that one. I didn't think it would actually be at the top. High up in the Department of Labor, high up in the Department of you name it. You're going to see these activists getting positions.
Who has been, I'm sorry, I'm behind the curve here. Who has been designated for Secretary of Education? And what's wrong with that person?
Because I cannot remember the person's name, but I picture his face very clearly. He has qualifications in one and only one thing, particularly, which is ethnic studies.
Okay.
He is an ethnic studies czar. The same ethnic studies that's just we're seeing in California. That's just an absolute train wreck. We see it in Washington State, where they're literally teaching ethnomathematics instead of mathematics. Literally. And I saw that this was likely to be the case, that these people would be, I mean, I could put the Google and find out what his name is, but
Okay, so your antipathy to and your understanding of and dislike of the woke sensibility all the way back to postmodernism and such, and the fear that Biden would be the stalking horse for this kind of mentality getting into the federal government.
So this is the background, because there was a tipping point.
I'm listening.
There were two tipping points back to back. Number one, I watched those debates, which is always an error, but I watched them anyway, participated in my civic duty. I watched the presidential debates and I watched the vice presidential debate, and I watched them refuse to answer the question. Both Biden and Harris refused to answer the question, will you pack the Supreme Court?
Yeah.
There's all these articles about that, and they literally Biden actually just stared down the barrel of the camera like very intensely and just started talking about, it's very important that you vote. Blah, blah. He didn't even answer the question.
Yeah.
And just ran down the clock. Harris said, oh, you want to talk about that? That's very important. Let's talk about Honest Abe. Honest Abe of the Republican Party. He packed the court. Yeah. 1860. Like, that's a long time ago. Circumstances were a little different in I don't know if you know what was going on in 1860 in the country. It was a tumultuous time in American history. Yeah, there's a few pages of history have been written about the 1860s. So it's like they won't answer this question, and then there's articles about how and these aren't small Move On or some goofy progressive thing. They're like in The Nation. They're in like big places. They're writing things like New Statesman. They're writing things like, we need to if Trump wins, we need to if Biden wins, I screw this up every time. If Biden wins, we need to and we have a conservative court, we just need to disregard the Supreme Court from now on. If they rule against him, just ignore them. And then maybe we need to pack the court. Maybe we definitely need to pack the court. Maybe what we need to do is abolish. This was an actual article that was my final tipping point. So I'm building up with all this, like pack the court was really huge. And then all of a sudden an article comes out, and I know it's stupid, and I think it was in the New Statesman or something like this, or The Nation, one or the other. And the article comes out and it says, we need to abolish the Constitution. And it's like, this is what, and I know it's just a one writer.
People are going to call you hysterical, man. Nobody wants to abolish the Constitution. That's hyperbole.
Somebody does. They wrote the article. Somebody does. And this is the thing. You say nobody wants to abolish the Constitution, but you should go open the book, Critical Race Theory, an Introduction by Richard Delgado and Gene Stefanczyk. Basic critical race theory textbook. Page 3, aka first paragraph of the book says, unlike tradition, this is a close to a quote, unlike traditional approaches to civil rights, which favor incrementalism and step-by-step progress, we call into question the very premises of the liberal order, including Enlightenment rationalism, legal reasoning, equality theory, and the neutral principles of constitutional law. Critical race theorists are not reeled down with the Constitution.
Yeah. They don't
So
like the
people do
electoral
maybe
college.
want to abolish, and
They
then
don't
you
like
look
the
at the
electoral
social media.
college. Yeah.
The social media stuff is how do you use Twitter.com and Jack Dorsey to sidestep the First Amendment?